The winter months brought new challenges and unexpected moments of triumph for Princess Charlotte. James had watched her navigate the holiday season with remarkable grace, managing her diabetes through family gatherings, public appearances, and the sugar-laden traditions that made Christmas magical for children around the world. Christmas at Sandringham had required extensive planning and coordination. The Royal Medical Team worked closely with the estate staff to ensure that Charlotte could participate fully in all the family traditions while maintaining careful control of her blood sugar levels. James had been present for many of these celebrations, witnessing firsthand how the family had adapted their customs to accommodate Charlotte's needs without making her feel excluded or different. The most touching moment had come during the traditional Christmas morning gift exchange. Charlotte had received a beautifully crafted jewelry box with special compartments designed specifically for her diabetes supplies. The gift had been commissioned by her grandmother, the Queen, and represented the family's commitment to helping Charlotte see her condition as something that could be managed with elegance and dignity rather than hidden away in shame. James had seen tears in Charlotte's eyes as she examined the intricate details of the jewelry box. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with delicate engravings and hidden compartments that made her medical supplies feel less like medical equipment and more like precious accessories. It was a powerful message of acceptance and love that resonated deeply with the 8-year-old princess. The new year brought with it renewed focus on Charlotte's long-term goals and aspirations. The palace education team had been working to ensure that her diabetes wouldn't limit her academic opportunities or her future career possibilities. There had been extensive consultations with medical experts, educational specialists, and families of other young people with diabetes to develop a comprehensive plan for Charlotte's continued development. Charlotte had expressed interest in equestrian sports, following in the footsteps of many royal family members who had found joy and success in riding. The challenge was ensuring that she could pursue this passion safely while managing her diabetes effectively. The stable staff at Windsor had received specialized training, and protocols had been developed for monitoring Charlotte's blood sugar before, during, and after riding sessions. James had been present for Charlotte's first riding lesson after her diagnosis, watching nervously as she mounted her pony with the same confidence she had always shown. The lesson went beautifully, with Charlotte demonstrating that her diabetes didn't diminish her natural ability or her love for the sport. It was a crucial step in proving to herself and everyone around her that her condition didn't have to define the boundaries of her interests. The relationship between Charlotte and her medical team had evolved significantly over the months. What had initially been a source of anxiety and resistance had transformed into a collaborative partnership. Charlotte had learned to communicate effectively about how she was feeling, to recognize patterns in her blood sugar levels, and to advocate for her needs in various situations. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Charlotte's primary endocrinologist, had become a trusted friend as well as a medical provider. She had a remarkable gift for explaining complex medical concepts in ways that Charlotte could understand and apply to her daily life. More importantly, she had helped Charlotte see herself as a capable young person who happened to have diabetes, rather than as a diabetic child whose life was defined by medical limitations. The school environment had also continued to evolve positively. Charlotte's classmates had initially been curious about her condition, asking questions that sometimes made her uncomfortable. But, over time, the novelty had worn off, and Charlotte had found that most of her friends simply accepted her diabetes as one characteristic among many others that made her who she was. There had been one particularly memorable incident when a new student had made thoughtless comments about Charlotte's glucose monitor, calling it weird and asking invasive questions about her medical routine. James had watched from a distance as Charlotte handled the situation with remarkable poise, calmly explaining her condition and setting appropriate boundaries about what she was and wasn't willing to discuss. The incident had marked a turning point in Charlotte's confidence. Rather than feeling ashamed or defensive about her diabetes, she had demonstrated that she could educate others while protecting her own privacy and dignity. It was a sophisticated response that impressed both her teachers and the palace staff who had been working so hard to support her emotional development. James had begun to notice that Charlotte was developing a unique perspective on challenges and resilience that seemed beyond her years. She would sometimes make observations about people who were struggling with various difficulties, offering compassionate insights that reflected her own experience of learning to adapt and thrive despite obstacles. During one of their morning drives, Charlotte had asked James about his own challenges and how he had learned to overcome them. The question had caught him off guard, but it had led to a meaningful conversation about personal growth, the importance of seeking help when needed, and the strength that could be found in vulnerability. It was remarkable to realize that an 8-year-old was teaching him important lessons about courage and resilience. The palace communications team had been carefully monitoring public interest in Charlotte's condition. There had been some initial media speculation when news of her diagnosis became public, but the coverage had been largely respectful and sympathetic. Several diabetes advocacy organizations had reached out, hoping to work with the palace on awareness campaigns, but the family remained focused on protecting Charlotte's privacy while she continued to adjust to her new reality. Charlotte had begun to express interest in learning more about other young people with diabetes. She wanted to understand how children in different circumstances manage their condition, particularly those who didn't have access to the same level of medical care and family support that she enjoyed. It was the beginning of what would later develop into a passionate commitment to advocacy and philanthropy. The medical technology that supported Charlotte's diabetes management continued to evolve rapidly. New monitoring systems promised greater accuracy and convenience, while advances in insulin delivery offered the possibility of even better blood sugar control. Charlotte was always eager to learn about these innovations, approaching new medical tools with the same curiosity she brought to all aspects of her education. James had been struck by Charlotte's ability to maintain her sense of humor even during difficult moments related to her diabetes. When her glucose monitor had malfunctioned during a family outing, causing unnecessary alarm, Charlotte had joked that even her medical equipment needed a vacation sometimes. Her ability to find lightness in challenging situations was a gift that served her well and brought joy to everyone around her. The support network that had formed around Charlotte extended far beyond the immediate palace staff. Families from around the world had written letters sharing their own experiences with childhood diabetes, offering encouragement and practical advice. While Charlotte couldn't respond to all the correspondence personally, she had asked the palace staff to ensure that these families knew how much their support meant to her. Charlotte's relationship with her siblings had deepened through the shared experience of adapting to her diagnosis. Prince George had taken on a protective role, always ensuring that Charlotte had access to her supplies and watching for signs that she might need help. Prince Louis, despite his young age, had learned to recognize when Charlotte was checking her blood sugar and would quietly play nearby without disturbing her routine. The family's approach to managing Charlotte's condition had become a model for other royal households facing similar challenges. The balance they had achieved between medical necessity and normal childhood development had attracted attention from pediatric diabetes specialists around the world. Several international medical conferences had requested presentations about the royal family's approach, though such requests were carefully considered to ensure they aligned with the family's commitment to privacy. James found himself thinking often about the broader implications of Charlotte's journey. Her experience was highlighting important issues about childhood chronic illness, the need for better support systems in schools, and the importance of maintaining dignity and hope in the face of medical challenges. It was remarkable to see how one 8-year-old girl's courage was creating ripple effects that might benefit countless other families. As spring approached, Charlotte had settled into a routine that felt increasingly natural and sustainable. The constant vigilance that had characterized the early months after her diagnosis had given way to confident self-management and appropriate caution. She was thriving academically, socially, and personally, proving that diabetes didn't have to limit her potential in any meaningful way. The transformation that James had witnessed in Charlotte over these months was nothing short of extraordinary. The frightened, confused child who had struggled with her diagnosis had evolved into a confident young person who understood her condition and refused to let it define her limitations. It was a journey that had inspired everyone who had been privileged to witness it. The weeks following Charlotte's diagnosis brought a new rhythm to life at Kensington Palace. James found himself becoming more than just a protection officer. He was becoming a confidant, a steady presence in a world that suddenly felt much more uncertain for the young princess. Charlotte's daily routine now revolved around careful timing and constant monitoring. Every meal required calculation, every activity needed to be planned around blood sugar checks, and every outing carried the additional weight of medical preparedness. James watched as the 8-year-old girl struggled to adapt to these changes while maintaining the composure expected of a member of the royal family. The palace medical team had established a comprehensive support system, but James could see that the emotional aspects of Charlotte's condition were perhaps the most challenging to address. During their daily drives to and from school, he began to notice the subtle ways that Charlotte was processing her new reality. Some days, she would pepper him with questions about diabetes, wanting to understand everything about her condition with the intellectual curiosity that was characteristic of her personality. She would ask about famous people who had diabetes, whether she would be able to pursue all the activities she had planned for her future, and how other children managed their condition while still living full lives. Other days, Charlotte would fall into thoughtful silences that spoke volumes about the internal struggle she was facing. James had learned to read these moods, understanding when to engage in conversation and when to simply provide quiet, supportive presence. The weight of being different from her classmates was something that Charlotte carried with grace beyond her years, but it was still a burden that no 8-year-old should have to bear alone. The school had worked diligently to integrate Charlotte's medical needs into the daily routine while preserving her sense of normalcy. Her teachers had been trained to recognize the signs of blood sugar fluctuations, and there were protocols in place for various scenarios. But James could see that Charlotte was acutely aware of the special attention, and it bothered her more than she was willing to admit. During one particularly difficult morning, Charlotte had experienced a low blood sugar episode during her mathematics lesson. The teacher had handled it perfectly, following the established protocols and ensuring that Charlotte received the necessary care. But when James arrived to pick her up that afternoon, he could see the embarrassment and frustration in her eyes. The ride home that day was different. Charlotte sat quietly in the back seat, her usual chatter replaced by a heavy silence that filled the car. James could see her reflection in the mirror, and the expression on her face broke his heart. This was a child who was trying so hard to be brave, to handle her condition with the grace and dignity expected of her position. But she was still just 8 years old. As they pulled into the palace grounds, Charlotte finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She asked James if he thought she would ever feel normal again, if there would come a time when diabetes wouldn't be the first thing she thought about when she woke up each morning. The vulnerability in her question caught James off guard, and he found himself struggling to find the right words to comfort her. That evening, James found himself thinking about Charlotte's question long after his shift had ended. He reached out to other families dealing with childhood diabetes, wanting to understand how other children had learned to thrive with the condition. The stories he heard were both heartbreaking and inspiring, tales of young people who had refused to let diabetes define the limits of their dreams. The next morning, James arrived at the palace with a renewed sense of purpose. He had spent the night researching successful people with diabetes, athletes who had competed at the highest levels, artists who had created beautiful works, leaders who had changed the world. He was determined to help Charlotte see that her condition didn't have to limit her potential. Charlotte's relationship with her glucose monitor had become a source of particular frustration. The device was necessary for monitoring her blood sugar levels, but it served as a constant reminder of her condition. James had noticed how she would sometimes try to hide it under her sleeves or position herself so that classmates wouldn't see it during group activities. The palace communications team had been working carefully to manage public awareness of Charlotte's condition. They wanted to be honest about her diagnosis while protecting her privacy and ensuring that she wouldn't be subjected to unnecessary scrutiny or pity. It was a delicate balance that required constant adjustment as Charlotte grew and as public interest evolved. James began to incorporate subtle educational moments into their daily routines. He would share stories about athletes with diabetes who had competed in the Olympics, about scientists and artists and leaders who had achieved remarkable things while managing their condition. He wanted Charlotte to understand that diabetes was just one part of who she was, not the defining characteristic of her entire life. The support from Charlotte's family was unwavering, but James could see the toll that the diagnosis was taking on her parents as well. The Prince and Princess of Wales were doing everything they could to maintain normalcy while ensuring their daughter received the best possible care. The constant worry was evident in their eyes, even as they worked to project confidence and optimism for Charlotte's benefit. Charlotte's brothers, Prince George and Prince Louis, had also been affected by the diagnosis. The palace had worked to educate them about diabetes in age-appropriate ways, helping them understand how to support their sister while treating her normally. James had observed the touching ways that the siblings had rallied around Charlotte, creating an environment of love and acceptance that was helping her adjust to her new reality. The medical team continued to fine-tune Charlotte's treatment plan, working to find the right balance of insulin, diet, and activity that would allow her to maintain stable blood sugar levels while living as normal a life as possible. Every adjustment required careful monitoring and documentation, a process that Charlotte was learning to participate in with remarkable maturity. James had begun to notice positive changes in Charlotte's demeanor as the weeks progressed. She was becoming more confident in managing her condition, more willing to advocate for her needs, and more open about discussing diabetes when appropriate. The initial shame and embarrassment were gradually being replaced by a sense of empowerment and understanding. During one of their morning drives, Charlotte surprised James by asking if she could help other children who had recently been diagnosed with diabetes. She had been thinking about how scared and confused she had felt in the early days, and she wanted to use her platform to help others who were facing the same challenges. The compassion and wisdom in her request reminded James why he had such deep respect for the royal family. The idea of Charlotte becoming an advocate for childhood diabetes awareness was discussed extensively within the palace. The communications team saw the potential for positive impact, but they were also mindful of the need to protect Charlotte's privacy and ensure that any public role was age-appropriate and aligned with her personal comfort level. Charlotte's teachers had reported remarkable improvements in her confidence and academic performance. Once she had adjusted to the routine of blood sugar monitoring and had learned to manage her condition effectively, she had returned to her usual enthusiastic participation in all aspects of school life. The initial disruption had given way to a new normal that worked well for everyone involved. James found himself developing a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by families dealing with chronic childhood conditions. The constant vigilance, the need to plan every detail of daily life, the emotional roller coaster of good days and difficult days, it all required a level of strength and resilience that he had never fully appreciated before working so closely with Charlotte. The bond between James and Charlotte had deepened significantly through this experience. She had come to trust him not just as her protector, but as someone who genuinely understood and cared about her well-being. The formal distance that had once characterized their relationship had evolved into something more personal and meaningful, while still maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. As autumn turned to winter, Charlotte's confidence continued to grow. She had learned to check her blood sugar discreetly, to calculate carbohydrates in her meals, and to recognize the early signs of blood sugar fluctuations. The medical management that had once seemed overwhelming was becoming routine, freeing her mental energy to focus on the things she loved most about being 8 years old. The palace staff had all adapted to the new routines with remarkable dedication and care. From the kitchen staff who had mastered carbohydrate counting to the scheduling team who built flexibility into Charlotte's calendar, everyone had embraced their role in supporting the young princess. It was a testament to the loyalty and professionalism that James had always admired about the royal household. James knew that the journey ahead would continue to present challenges, but he also knew that Charlotte possessed the strength and determination to face whatever came next. The scared little girl who had struggled with her diagnosis was transforming into a confident young person who understood that her condition was just one part of a much larger, more beautiful story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Kensington Palace as Senior Protection Officer James Mitchell adjusted his earpiece and checked his watch. 23 years of service had taught him that routine was everything in royal protection, but today felt different somehow. The autumn air carried a crispness that made everything seem more vivid, more alive. Princess Charlotte emerged from the palace's side entrance, her school bag slung over one shoulder, moving with the careful grace that had been instilled in her since birth. At 8 years old, she possessed a remarkable composure that often surprised visitors, but James had learned to read the subtle signs that others missed. Today, something was weighing on the young princess's mind. The drive to Thomas's Battersea should have been routine. James had made this journey countless times, navigating the familiar streets while maintaining the careful balance between protection and normalcy that the royal family insisted upon. But as they pulled away from the palace gates, he noticed Charlotte's unusual silence in the rearview mirror. Normally, the princess would chatter about her upcoming day, sharing stories about her classmates or asking questions about the world beyond the palace walls. She had an insatiable curiosity that reminded James of her mother, the Princess of Wales, and a mischievous streak that definitely came from her father. But today, Charlotte sat quietly, staring out the window with an expression that seemed far too serious for someone her age. The London traffic moved at its usual pace as they made their way through the city streets. James had learned over the years that royal children needed space to be themselves, away from the constant scrutiny and formal expectations. His role was to protect them, yes, but also to provide a sense of normalcy in lives that were anything but normal. As they approached a red light, James caught Charlotte's reflection in the mirror. She was fidgeting with something in her hands, turning it over and over with nervous energy. It was then that he noticed the medical alert bracelet on her wrist, something new that hadn't been there the week before. The revelation of Princess Charlotte's condition had come as a shock to the entire royal household staff. Type 1 diabetes was a serious condition for anyone, but for a member of the royal family, it represented challenges that went far beyond the medical. Every meal, every public appearance, every moment of her day now required careful planning and constant vigilance. James had received extensive briefing about the condition from the royal medical team. He knew about blood sugar monitoring, the importance of timing for meals and snacks, and the signs to watch for that might indicate a medical emergency. The theoretical knowledge was one thing, but seeing the reality of what this 8-year-old girl was dealing with was entirely another. The palace had worked hard to maintain privacy around Charlotte's diagnosis. The royal family had always been protective of their children's medical information, believing that the young princes and princess deserved as normal a childhood as possible despite their extraordinary circumstances. But normal was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. James had been present during the family meetings where Charlotte's care plan was discussed. He had seen the worry in her parents' eyes, the way they struggled to balance their desire to protect their daughter with their determination not to let the condition define her life. The Princess of Wales had been particularly vocal about ensuring that Charlotte's spirits remained high and that she didn't feel limited by her diagnosis. The weight of responsibility that James felt in that moment was unlike anything he had experienced in his career. He had protected royals through public appearances, international trips, and even security threats, but this was different. This was about protecting a child who was facing an invisible enemy that could strike at any moment. As they continued toward school, Charlotte finally broke her silence. Her voice was small, almost hesitant, as she asked about the schedule for the day. James could hear the underlying anxiety in her question, the way she was trying to process how her new reality would fit into the routine of school life. The medical team had worked closely with Charlotte's teachers to develop a comprehensive care plan. Her classroom would be equipped with emergency supplies. Her teachers had received training on diabetes management, and there would always be a school nurse available. But James knew that all the planning in the world couldn't address the emotional impact of being different from her classmates. Charlotte had always been acutely aware of her royal status and how it set her apart from other children. The diabetes diagnosis added another layer of difference, another way in which her life diverged from the normal childhood experiences of her peers. James could see the struggle in her young face as she tried to process these changes. The conversation with the royal medical team had been extensive and thorough. They had explained the importance of maintaining Charlotte's blood sugar levels, the need for regular testing, and the potential complications that could arise if the condition wasn't properly managed. They had also emphasized the psychological aspects of childhood diabetes, the way it could impact a child's self-esteem and social interactions. James had been trained to handle medical emergencies, but he had never expected to become so intimately involved in the daily management of a chronic condition. The glucose monitor that Charlotte wore would alert him to any dangerous changes in her blood sugar levels. He carried emergency supplies in his jacket pocket and had memorized the protocols for various scenarios. But beyond the medical aspects, James found himself thinking about the emotional toll this was taking on Charlotte. She was a bright, spirited child who had always embraced life with enthusiasm. The diagnosis threatened to cast a shadow over that natural joy, and James was determined to help her maintain her sense of adventure and wonder. The palace staff had rallied around Charlotte with remarkable dedication. The kitchen staff had completely revamped their meal planning, working with nutritionists to create delicious meals that met Charlotte's dietary requirements. The scheduling team had built in time for blood sugar checks and snack breaks. Everyone was committed to making this transition as smooth as possible for the young princess. As they pulled up to the school, James could see Charlotte's shoulders tense slightly. The first day back after the diagnosis had been challenging, with well-meaning teachers and classmates asking questions that Charlotte wasn't ready to answer. The palace communications team had released a carefully worded statement about Charlotte's condition, but that didn't make the daily reality any easier for an 8-year-old to navigate. James watched as Charlotte gathered her belongings, checking to make sure she had her glucose monitor and emergency supplies. The routine that should have been automatic still required conscious effort, a constant reminder of how her life had changed. But there was something in her posture, a determination that reminded James why he had such respect for the royal family's resilience. The school had been incredibly supportive, implementing all the necessary accommodations while working to maintain Charlotte's privacy and dignity. Her teachers understood the importance of treating her normally while remaining vigilant about her medical needs. It was a delicate balance that required constant communication and adjustment. As Charlotte stepped out of the car, she turned back to James with a look that seemed to carry the weight of the world. For a moment, the careful composure slipped, and he could see the scared little girl beneath the princess exterior. It was in that moment that James realized this was going to be about much more than medical management. It was going to be about helping Charlotte find her strength in the face of a challenge that would be with her for the rest of her life. The morning routine continued as it always did, but everything felt different now. Every interaction carried new meaning. Every decision required additional consideration. James found himself watching Charlotte with heightened awareness, looking for the subtle signs that might indicate she needed help, while trying to maintain the careful distance that allowed her to feel independent and normal. As he watched her walk toward the school building, James made a silent promise to himself and to the young princess. He would do everything in his power to help her navigate this new reality while preserving the joy and spirit that made Charlotte who she was. The road ahead would be challenging, but James was determined to help her face it with courage and grace. In the grand corridors of Kensington Palace, where protocol reigns supreme and emotions are carefully hidden behind polished uniforms, something extraordinary happened that would forever change the way the world sees the British royal family. It was a moment so raw, so human, that it broke through centuries of royal tradition in just a few whispered words from a young princess to her steadfast protector. When 8-year-old Princess Charlotte approached her royal protection officer with tears in her eyes, nobody could have predicted that her simple, honest explanation would reduce a battle-hardened guard to tears and reveal a truth that would touch millions of hearts worldwide. This is the story of courage, vulnerability, and the unbreakable bond between a princess who refused to be defined by her struggles and the guardian who learned that true strength sometimes means showing your heart. What Princess Charlotte shared that day wasn't just a secret. It was a window into a reality that many families face in silence, a reminder that even behind palace walls, children fight battles that the world never sees. Her words would not only change her guard's perspective forever, but would also inspire a global conversation about childhood resilience, royal humanity, and the power of speaking your truth, no matter who you are.